The smell hit me first. That acrid, synthetic stench that crawls into your nostrils and refuses to leave. I pushed open the door to my childhood bedroom, expecting to find my wedding dress hanging pristine and perfect where I'd left it just hours before. Instead, I found Madison standing over a metal trash can in the center of my room, lighter fluid dripping from the empty bottle in her hand, watching the last remnants of ivory silk and French lace curl into black ash. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. She didn't even look up when I screamed. Just kept staring at the flames with this satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, like she was watching a particularly good movie. The dress I'd saved for 3 years to buy. The dress that had belonged to our grandmother's best friend in 1952, restored with hand-sewn pearls and vintage buttons. The dress I was supposed to wear in 18 hours. "Oops," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "Guess you'll have to find something else." Mom appeared in the doorway behind me, took one look at the scene, and sighed like Madison had just spilled juice on the carpet. "Well, honey, you should have been more careful where you left it. You know how clumsy your sister gets when she's excited." Excited. Not jealous, not vindictive. Excited. Dad's voice drifted up from downstairs. "What's all the commotion? We've got guests arriving soon for the rehearsal dinner." "Nothing, dear," Mom called back. "Just a little accident." That word hung in the air like smoke. Accident. As if Madison had accidentally doused my wedding dress in lighter fluid and accidentally lit it on fire in a metal trash can she'd accidentally carried up to my room. As if the camera on her phone, still recording, had accidentally captured every second of my devastation. I stood there, watching $3,000 and 6 months of dreams turn to ash, and something inside me calcified, not broke, hardened. Because this wasn't the first time Madison had taken something that mattered to me. It was just the first time she'd done it with fire. I'm Sophia Chen Rodriguez, and if you think this story ends with me crying in a borrowed dress at my own wedding, you're about to learn something important about underestimating the quiet sister. Growing up, Madison was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when she was doing everything wrong. She was 3 years older, 3 inches taller, and according to everyone in Millbrook, Connecticut, 3 times more beautiful. She had that effortless blonde perfection that made photographers stop her on the street and made boys drive their cars into mailboxes trying to get her attention. I had dark hair that never held a curl, freckles that makeup couldn't cover, and a tendency to read books instead of flirting at parties. The comparisons started early. Madison's so outgoing, Sophia's so shy. Madison's the pretty one, Sophia's the smart one. As if being smart was a consolation prize for not being beautiful. As if there wasn't room in one family for 2 daughters to shine. But Madison made sure there wasn't. When I was 12 and finally saved enough babysitting money for the designer jeans every girl at school was wearing, I came home to find them in Madison's closet with the tags cut off. "Oh, I thought they were mine," she'd said with that innocent shrug that fooled everyone but me. "Besides, they look better on me." When I was 15 and got asked to prom by Jake Morrison, the boy I'd had a crush on since middle school, Madison swooped in the next day with her practiced smile and perfect laugh. By Friday, Jake was asking her instead. "I didn't know you liked him," she'd said, but her eyes told a different story. When I was 17 and won the state championship for debate team, the local newspaper wanted to do a feature story. Somehow, Madison ended up in half the photos, talking about how proud she was of her little sister and how she'd always been the supportive one. The pattern was always the same. I would work for something, dream about something, achieve something, and Madison would find a way to either take it or diminish it. And everyone would excuse it. Madison's just confident. Madison's just naturally competitive. Madison doesn't mean any harm. But I saw the calculation in her eyes. The way she'd watch me get excited about something, then systematically figure out how to make it hers. The way she'd comfort me afterward with fake sympathy while wearing my clothes or dating my crush or standing in my spotlight. College gave me 4 blessed years of distance. I went to Northwestern for journalism. She stayed local at UConn for communications. I thought maybe space would change things. Maybe she'd find her own identity instead of stealing pieces of mine. Maybe I could finally build something she couldn't touch. That's where I met Daniel. He was everything Madison usually went for. 6'2", dark hair, blue eyes, the kind of smile that made professors forget to assign homework. Captain of the lacrosse team, pre-med with a perfect GPA, from old Connecticut money. Exactly the type of guy who'd take one look at Madison and forget I existed. But Daniel was different. He saw me first at the library, hunched over my laptop at 2 a.m, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, trying to perfect an article for the student newspaper. Most guys would have walked past. Daniel sat down across from me and asked what I was writing about. We talked until sunrise. About journalism and medicine, about books and travel, about the pressure of family expectations and the fear of never being enough. He listened when I spoke. Actually listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. He laughed at my terrible jokes and asked follow-up questions about my stories and seemed genuinely fascinated by the way my mind worked. He never once asked if I had any sisters. We dated for 2 years before I brought him home for Christmas. I knew it was risky, but we were serious. Ring shopping serious. Daniel had already asked Dad's permission, had already planned the proposal for New Year's Eve. I thought maybe, just maybe, Madison had grown up enough to be happy for me. I was wrong. The moment Madison saw Daniel, something shifted in her eyes. That predatory focus I remembered from high school, like a hawk spotting prey. She turned on the charm full blast. The hair flipping, the perfect laugh, the way she'd touch his arm when she talked and lean in just a little too close. But Daniel didn't bite. He was polite but distant, keeping his attention on me, deflecting her advances with the skill of someone who'd dealt with women like Madison before. I watched her frustration grow as the evening wore on, watched her try harder and harder to get his attention, watched him choose me over and over again. On New Year's Eve, Daniel proposed on the beach where we'd had our first real conversation about the future. It was perfect, simple, just us and the sunset and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I called home crying happy tears, ready to share the joy with my family. Madison answered the phone. Engaged? Her voice was flat. That's nice, Sophia. I'm sure you'll be very happy. There was something in her tone that made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling away. This was my moment, my happiness. For once, she couldn't take it from me. The engagement period was a minefield. Madison inserted herself into every aspect of the wedding planning, volunteering to help with everything from venue scouting to dress shopping. Mom encouraged it, thrilled that her daughters were finally bonding over something. I couldn't explain that Madison's help felt more like surveillance, that every suggestion she made was designed to diminish rather than enhance. When I found my dream dress at a vintage boutique in Hartford, Madison was with me. It was a 1950s original, ivory silk with hand-sewn lace appliques and tiny pearl buttons down the back. The moment I put it on, I felt transformed, beautiful, radiant, like the bride I'd always dreamed of being. It's very retro, Madison said, circling me with that calculating look. Are you sure it's not too old-fashioned? I mean, it's gorgeous, but you want to look modern on your wedding day. But even Madison couldn't dim the magic of that dress. The shop owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, told me it had belonged to her best friend who'd worn it in 1952 for what she called the most beautiful wedding Connecticut had ever seen. Mrs. Patterson had saved it all these years, waiting for the right bride. Some dresses choose their brides, she said, tears in her eyes as she watched me in the mirror. This one chose you. I bought it on the spot. Despite the price tag that made my student loan debt feel even heavier, it was worth it. For the first time in my life, I felt like a beautiful sister. Madison's own dress shopping had been an elaborate production. 3 different boutiques, 2 fittings, endless photos posted to social media. She'd chosen a designer gown that cost more than my college tuition, all flowing fabric and crystal beading, the kind of dress that belonged on a red carpet more than in a church. When I get married, she'd said, I want people to remember the dress for decades. The irony wasn't lost on me that my vintage dress would actually last decades, while her trendy creation would look dated in 5 years. But I kept that observation to myself. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a careful dance of territory and boundaries. Madison volunteered to host my bachelorette party, then planned activities I hated. She suggested vendors who mysteriously became unavailable once I contacted them. She offered to help with seating arrangements, then accidentally put Daniel's ex-girlfriend at our table. But I navigated each challenge with growing confidence. For once, I had something Madison couldn't take. Daniel loved me, not her. The wedding was happening, whether she liked it or not. I was finally going to be the star of my own story. The night before the wedding, I hung my dress carefully in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd once cried over stolen jeans and broken dreams. It looked ethereal in the lamplight, like something from a fairy tale. I ran my fingers over the delicate lace, imagining Daniel's face when he saw me walking down the aisle. I should have known Madison wouldn't let me have that moment. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I should have recognized the signs. The way she'd been too quiet lately, too helpful, too agreeable. The way she'd stopped making snide comments about my choices, and started complimenting everything with saccharine sweetness. Madison was never sweet unless she was planning something. But I was too happy to be suspicious, too caught up in the joy of finally having something that was mine alone. I went to bed that night dreaming of my perfect day, of the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of my sister's laughter. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be intimate. 35 people, Daniel's family and mine, gathered at Riverside Manor overlooking the Connecticut River. I sat at the head table in a borrowed sundress, smiling until my cheeks ached, pretending my world hadn't just gone up in flames 3 hours earlier. Madison glided through the evening like nothing had happened. She wore a stunning emerald dress that perfectly complemented her eyes, her hair cascading in loose waves that caught the candlelight. She hugged relatives, charmed Daniel's parents, and gave a toast about how proud she was of her baby sister finally finding love. "Sophia has always been the one who works hardest for what she wants," she said, raising her glass with that practiced smile. "And Daniel, you're getting someone who will never give up on the things that matter to her." The irony was suffocating. I watched her performance, watched everyone nod and smile and comment on what a sweet sister she was, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not the sharp crack of heartbreak, but the slow, deliberate hardening of resolve. Because this wasn't random destruction. This was calculated warfare, and I'd been fighting it unarmed for 24 years. The signs had been there all along, patterns I'd dismissed as sibling rivalry or Madison's competitive nature. But sitting there, watching her bask in the sympathy she was getting for being, quote, so supportive during this stressful time, I finally saw the architecture of her cruelty. She didn't just want what I had. She wanted to be the one who decided whether I could have it at all. The earliest memory I could pin down was my 8th birthday party. I'd asked for a small celebration, just family and a few friends from school, with a chocolate cake shaped like a castle. I'd been obsessed with fairy tales that year, spending hours drawing princesses and dragons in the margins of my notebooks. Mom had worked for weeks on that cake, sculpting turrets and flags, creating a moat with blue icing. It was everything I'd dreamed of. When she carried it out, singing happy birthday with everyone else, I felt like the most important person in the world. Until Madison accidentally bumped into the table. The cake toppled sideways, the castle crumbling into a mess of chocolate and frosting. Madison gasped and covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh no! Sophia! I'm so sorry! I was just trying to get a better look." Everyone rushed to comfort her while I stared at the ruins of my birthday dream. "Don't worry, honey," Dad said, patting Madison's shoulder. "These things happen. We'll get another cake from the store." But store-bought sheet cake with "Happy Birthday, Sophia," scrawled in generic icing, wasn't the same as the castle Mom had spent weeks creating. And the look in Madison's eyes when she thought no one was watching, satisfied, almost triumphant, told me the bump hadn't been an accident at all. The pattern repeated throughout our childhood, but always with plausible deniability. When I auditioned for the school play and got the lead role, Madison suddenly developed a passionate interest in theater and convinced Mom she needed acting lessons. By the time auditions came around for the spring production, Madison had the skills and connections to land the starring role I'd dreamed of. "I'm just naturally talented," she'd say with a shrug when people complimented her performance. "Some people have to work at it, but it just comes easily to me." When I started dating Tommy Chen sophomore year of high school, my first real boyfriend, my first kiss, my first everything, Madison befriended his ex-girlfriend and orchestrated a reunion at a party I wasn't invited to. Tommy broke up with me the next Monday, saying he realized he wasn't over his ex. "Maybe you're just not ready for a serious relationship," Madison had said, rubbing my back while I cried. "Some girls mature faster than others." When I got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, Madison suddenly decided she wanted to study communications too. She didn't have the grades for Northwestern, but she made sure everyone knew she was choosing to stay close to home rather than being rejected. She threw herself a celebration party for making the mature choice to support her family, while I packed for Chicago feeling guilty for leaving. But college had given me something Madison couldn't touch: perspective. Away from her shadow, I'd flourished. I'd made friends who knew me first, who valued my thoughts and opinions without comparing them to someone else's. I'd dated guys who chose me, not Madison. I'd won awards and recognition that had nothing to do with her. And then I'd met Daniel. The way Madison had reacted to Daniel during that Christmas visit should have been a bigger warning sign. I'd introduced him to everyone at our annual family party, watching nervously as he navigated the crowd of relatives and family friends. He was charming but not performative, interested but not overwhelming. He asked Aunt Carol about her art, discussed baseball with Uncle Mike, and complimented Grandma Rose on her famous sugar cookies. But it was his interaction with Madison that I should have paid more attention to. She'd approached him while I was in the kitchen helping with appetizers, positioning herself strategically by the fireplace where the light was most flattering. I watched through the doorway as she deployed her full arsenal: the hair flip, the laugh, the way she'd touch her collarbone when she spoke. She was wearing a red dress that hugged every curve, and she knew exactly how stunning she looked. Daniel was polite but uninterested. He responded to her questions with brief answers, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for an escape route. When I returned with a tray of cheese and crackers, his whole demeanor changed. His shoulders relaxed, his smile became genuine, and he immediately moved to my side. "Your sister was just telling me about her modeling," he said, wrapping his arm around my waist. "Sounds exciting." "Oh, it's just local stuff," Madison said, but her smile had turned brittle. "Nothing as impressive as what Sophia does with her writing." The compliment sounded genuine, but I caught the slight emphasis on writing, as if it were a hobby rather than a career aspiration. Daniel didn't seem to notice the subtle dig, but I filed it away with all the other small cruelties I'd learned to recognize. Later that night, Madison cornered me in the bathroom. "He seems nice," she said, reapplying her lipstick in the mirror. "A little serious, though. Are you sure he's not too uptight for you?" "He's perfect for me," I said, defensive. "Of course he is," she replied quickly. "I just meant, guys like that usually go for a certain type. I'm surprised he's not with someone more outgoing." There it was, the poison wrapped in concern, the suggestion that Daniel's choice of me was somehow surprising or temporary, that eventually he'd realize his mistake and choose someone more like her. But Daniel never wavered. Not during that visit, not during the months that followed, not when Madison made increasingly obvious attempts to capture his attention. He was mine in a way nothing had ever been mine before, and I think that drove Madison to desperation. The engagement announcement had been the final straw. I'd called home from Northwestern, still wearing Daniel's grandmother's ring, still glowing from the perfect proposal. Madison answered, and when I breathlessly shared the news, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Madison, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Congratulations." "Aren't you excited?" "I'm engaged. I'm actually getting married." Wow. Fast, isn't it? How long have you been dating?" 2 years. You know that." "Right. 2 years. Well, I guess when you know, you know." But she didn't sound like she thought I knew anything. She sounded like she thought I was making a mistake, like she was waiting for me to realize it. The next few months had been a masterclass in subtle sabotage. Madison offered to help with wedding planning, then made suggestions that were completely wrong for my taste. She recommended vendors who turned out to be unavailable or wildly expensive. She volunteered to handle invitations, then forgot to send them to half of Daniel's extended family. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she'd say each time, wide-eyed with apparent horror at her mistakes. "I don't know how that happened. Let me fix it right away." But the mistakes always seemed to work in her favor. The caterer she recommended specialized in cuisines I hated. The florist she suggested only worked with flowers I was allergic to. The photographer she found had a portfolio full of shots that looked nothing like the style I wanted. Each time I'd have to start over, wasting precious time and energy, while Madison played the supportive sister trying so hard to help her scattered little sister pull together a wedding. The dress shopping expedition had been her masterpiece of manipulation. "I think you should try something more modern," she'd said, as I stood in front of the mirror at the third boutique we'd visited. I was wearing a contemporary gown with clean lines and minimal decoration. The kind of dress that would photograph well but made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "It's beautiful," I said hesitantly, "but it doesn't feel like me." "That's because you're thinking too much," Madison replied, adjusting the dress's shoulders. "This is your chance to reinvent yourself. You don't have to be the bookish little sister at your own wedding. You can be glamorous, sophisticated. This dress would look amazing in photos. But I didn't want to reinvent myself. I wanted to be the best version of who I already was. And when I found my grandmother's friend's dress at that little vintage shop in Hartford, I knew I'd found the piece that would make that possible." Madison's reaction had been telling. She'd gone quiet when I stepped out of the dressing room, her eyes taking in every detail of the ivory silk and hand-sewn lace. For a moment, her carefully maintained mask slipped, and I saw something raw and desperate in her expression. "It's very you," she'd said finally, and somehow she made it sound like an insult. Mrs. Patterson, the shop owner, had ignored Madison entirely, focusing all her attention on me. "Some dresses choose their brides," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "This one has been waiting 60 years for the right girl." I'd never felt more beautiful than I did in that dress. Never felt more like myself, but elevated, transformed. It was everything I'd dreamed of and nothing Madison could compete with. Because it wasn't about trends or fashion or what looked good in photos. It was about finding the perfect expression of who I was becoming. But Madison had been there, Madison had seen. Madison had filed it away with all the other information she collected about things that mattered to me. Now, sitting at the rehearsal dinner in a borrowed sundress while she glowed in emerald silk, I finally understood the scope of her strategy. This wasn't just about the wedding dress. This was about ensuring that even on my most important day, I would be diminished, scrambling, grateful for whatever scraps of happiness I could salvage. She'd calculated the timing perfectly. Too late to find another dress, too close to the wedding to postpone, too public to cancel without massive embarrassment. I would walk down the aisle in something borrowed or hastily purchased, always knowing that the dress I dreamed of had been destroyed by the person who was supposed to love me most. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table and I turned to find him watching me with concern. "You okay? You seem a million miles away." "Just tired," I lied, squeezing back. "Long day." But I wasn't tired. I was awake in a way I'd never been before. Awake to the patterns, the calculations, the years of systematic diminishment. Awake to the fact that Madison would never stop, never be satisfied, never let me have anything without trying to take it away. As the evening wore on, I watched her work the room. She hugged Daniel's mother a little too long, complimented his father's tie, charmed his aunts with stories about our childhood that painted her as the protective big sister, and me as the helpless little one who needed constant guidance. "Sophia's always been a dreamer," she told Daniel's cousin Sarah, loud enough for me to hear. "I'm just glad she found someone practical like Daniel to keep her grounded." Dreamer. As if having ambitions was a character flaw, as if wanting things was naive. But the comment that broke something loose inside me came near the end of the evening. Madison was talking to Mrs. Hartford, Daniel's grandmother, when I overheard her say, "I just hope Sophia's ready for marriage. She's never been good at finishing things she starts." I'd hate to see her break Daniel's heart, when she realizes she's in over her head. Mrs. Hartford's expression shifted, concern creeping into her eyes as she glanced toward me. I saw doubt take root, saw her start to wonder if her grandson was making a mistake. That's when the last piece of my patience crumbled. I excused myself from the table and walked to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Not the confident bride-to-be I'd been that morning, but someone hollow-eyed and brittle. Someone who'd spent so many years defending against attacks that she'd forgotten how to go on the offensive. But that was about to change. Madison thought she'd won by destroying my dress. She thought she'd reduced me to desperation, forced me to scramble for alternatives while she stood by offering false sympathy and twisted support. She was wrong. For the first time in my life, I was going to stop playing defense. I was going to stop trying to build things Madison couldn't destroy, and start thinking about what she valued most, what she protected, what she couldn't bear to lose. And as I stood in that bathroom, staring at my reflection, I remembered something that made me smile for the first time since I'd found my dress in ashes. Madison's wedding dress was hanging in her closet, the designer gown that had cost more than my college tuition. The dress she'd chosen specifically to outshine every other bride who'd ever worn white. The dress she'd already started posting sneak peeks of on social media, building anticipation for her own engagement that everyone knew was coming. The dress that, unlike mine, was completely replaceable. I walked back to the rehearsal dinner with my shoulders straight and my smile genuine. Madison looked up as I approached, probably expecting to see me crumbling under the weight of tomorrow's disaster. Instead, she saw something that made her own smile falter. She saw her little sister, finally done asking for permission to fight back. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, October sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at Riverside Manor. I woke up at 5 a.m., not from nerves or excitement, but from the quiet hum of calculation that had been running through my mind since the rehearsal dinner ended. While Madison slept peacefully in the room next door, probably dreaming of the sympathy she'd received today as the supportive sister helping her poor, dressless sibling, I was wide awake, mentally cataloging every detail of what I'd observed over the past 18 hours. Madison's dress was hanging in the closet of the honeymoon suite, where she'd moved it for safekeeping after the fire. She'd made a big show of offering to let me see if it would fit, knowing full well that her size 4 frame was nothing like my size 8 curves. It might be a little snug, she'd said with false concern, but we could probably make it work with some creative pinning. Creative pinning. As if I would spend my wedding day squeezed into an ill-fitting dress that belonged to the person who destroyed my dream. But I'd thanked her sweetly and told her I'd already figured something out, which was true, just not in the way she expected. The first step in any good strategy is intelligence gathering, and I'd spent the past 12 hours collecting information like a journalist working the biggest story of her career. I knew that Madison planned to get her hair done at 9, makeup at 11, and photos with the bridesmaids at 1. I knew she'd hidden her dress shoes in 3 different locations because she was paranoid about someone moving them. I knew she'd set 7 different alarms because she couldn't bear the thought of being late to an event where she'd be the center of attention. Most importantly, I knew that she trusted me to be predictable, to be the flustered, emotional victim she'd always known. To spend the morning crying and scrambling while she played the role of the gracious sister swooping in to save the day. She was about to learn that predictable and stupid weren't the same thing. My phone buzzed with a text from my maid of honor, Jessica. Emergency backup dress shopping at 7 a.m.? I found 3 boutiques that open early. We can fix this. Jessica had been my roommate at Northwestern and knew Madison's history better than anyone in my family. She'd been the one to help me see the patterns, to point out the subtle ways Madison diminished my achievements and undermined my confidence. She'd also been the one to suggest I start documenting things, which was how I had 18 months' worth of screenshots, emails, and voice recordings stored in a private cloud drive. Thanks, but I've got it handled, I texted back. Trust me, today's going to be perfect. She responded with 3 question marks, but I didn't elaborate. The fewer people who knew what I was planning, the better. I slipped out of the bridal suite and made my way down to the hotel lobby, where I'd arranged to meet someone Madison didn't know existed, Detective Ray Kowalski, Daniel's cousin from the Connecticut State Police. Ray was the family member Daniel talked about most but rarely brought to gatherings because his work schedule was unpredictable. He specialized in arson investigation, which made him exactly the person I needed for what I was about to do. He was waiting in the hotel restaurant, nursing black coffee, and reading the newspaper like any other early rising guest. In his civilian clothes, nobody would guess he spent his days examining burn patterns and accelerant traces. "Sophia," he said, standing to hug me. "Congratulations on the big day. Daniel's a lucky guy." "Thank you, and thank you for meeting me so early. I know this is unusual." Ray's expression grew serious as I sat down across from him. "Daniel mentioned there was some kind of accident with your dress yesterday. Said it was upsetting you." "It wasn't an accident." I pulled out my phone and showed him the video Madison had recorded. The one she'd forgotten was automatically backed up to the family cloud account. She filmed herself burning it. Ray watched the footage twice, his cop instincts kicking in as he analyzed what he was seeing. This is deliberate destruction of property. The lighter fluid, the metal container, the way she positioned herself for the camera. This was planned. The dress was worth $3,000. It was irreplaceable. That makes it a felony. He looked up from the phone, his expression grim. "Sophia, you could press charges. This isn't just sibling rivalry, this is criminal behavior." "I know, and I might, but first, I need you to do something for me." I explained what I needed, watching Ray's eyebrows climb higher with each detail. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me with new respect. "You sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." She made sure there was no going back when she lit that match. Ray nodded slowly. "Okay. Give me 2 hours. I'll need to make some calls, pull in some favors. But we can make this happen." After Ray left, I returned to the bridal suite and began the most convincing performance of my life. I let Jessica and my other bridesmaids fuss over me, searching frantically for backup dress options. I allowed my mother to make increasingly frantic phone calls to boutiques and dress shops. I even let Madison comfort me with her saccharine sympathy while she live-streamed the drama to her Instagram followers. "My poor sister is being such a trooper," she told her phone camera, dabbing at my eyes with tissues. "Wedding day disasters are so heartbreaking, but she's handling it with such grace. I'm just trying to support her however I can." The comments poured in immediately. "You're such a good sister." "Poor Sophia, but she's lucky to have you." "Madison, you're an angel for helping." I played my part perfectly, letting tears fall at just the right moments, accepting comfort from everyone while Madison basked in the praise for her supportiveness. She was so busy managing her narrative that she didn't notice me slip out of the room at 10:30. Ray was waiting in the parking lot with 2 other men I didn't recognize. One was carrying official-looking equipment, the other had a camera with a long lens. "Fire marshal and crime scene photographer," Ray explained. "Both friends of mine, both very interested in proper evidence collection." We made our way to Madison's room, where her dress hung in pristine perfection. The designer creation that had cost more than most people's cars, with its hand-beaded bodice and silk train that would photograph beautifully in any setting. "Beautiful dress," the fire marshal commented. "Shame about what's going to happen to it." "Shame about what happened to mine," I replied evenly. The photographer began documenting everything while Ray explained the process. "We're going to recreate the exact conditions from yesterday. Same accelerant, same type of container, same environment. The only difference is the dress." "And is this all legal?" "Property destruction by the owner isn't a crime," Ray said. "This is your wedding gift from Daniel's family. Technically, it belongs to you now." That wasn't strictly true, but I wasn't going to argue the technicalities. Madison had destroyed something irreplaceable that belonged to me. Now she was going to understand what that felt like. The fire marshal worked with scientific precision, measuring accelerant amounts and documenting burn patterns. The photographer captured every angle, every detail. When they lit the fire, I watched Madison's dream dress curl and blacken exactly the way mine had, except this time, it was justice instead of cruelty. The smell was the same, that acrid, synthetic stench that would forever remind me of the moment I stopped being Madison's victim and became her opponent. "Perfect documentation," the fire marshal said as the last flames died out. "This will make an excellent comparison for the insurance investigation." Insurance investigation. I hadn't thought about that aspect, but Ray was already 3 steps ahead. Your sister's little stunt yesterday? That's going to trigger a fraud investigation when you file the claim. Arson is arson, even when it's family. But now we have evidence that shows the pattern, the methodology. This isn't random vandalism, this is calculated destruction. By the time we finished, it was noon, and I needed to be back for photos. I thanked Ray and his friends, then hurried back to the bridal suite, where chaos was reaching fever pitch. Sophia, thank God you're back. Jessica grabbed my arm as I walked in. We found 3 possible dresses, but none of them are quite right. Where were you? Just getting some air, I said calmly. But don't worry about the dresses. I have something else in mind. Madison looked up from her phone, where she was busy responding to the flood of sympathetic comments on her latest post. What do you mean? Sophia, honey, we need to get you dressed soon. The ceremony starts in 3 hours. I know exactly what I'm wearing, I said, meeting her eyes with a smile that made her blink in confusion. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. But what's something borrowed? Mom asked, clearly stressed. We've exhausted all our options. Actually, we haven't. I turned to Madison, my smile growing wider. Madison, remember how you offered to let me wear your dress? I think I'd like to take you up on that. The room went silent. Madison's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, realization, and finally panic. My dress? But, it wouldn't fit properly. And it's my dress for when When you what? I asked innocently. You're not engaged yet. And you did offer. In front of everyone, remember? You said we could make it work with creative pinning. Madison looked around the room, searching for support, but found only expectant faces. Mom, the bridesmaids, even the makeup artist who'd been quietly working in the corner. Everyone was looking at her like she'd just offered the perfect solution. That's brilliant, Jessica exclaimed. Madison, that's so generous of you. I don't think... Madison stammered, but Mom was already moving toward the door. Madison, honey, go get your dress right now. This is perfect. Sisters sharing such a special moment. But what will I wear? Madison asked desperately. I can't go to the wedding without a dress. Don't worry, I said sweetly. I'm sure we can find you something. Maybe one of the bridesmaid dresses? Jessica's about your size. The look of horror on Madison's face was everything I'd hoped for. The thought of wearing a simple bridesmaid dress while watching me get married in her designer creation was clearly her worst nightmare. I need to think about this, she said weakly. Think about what? Mom asked, confused. Sophia needs a dress, you have a dress, and you offered to share. This is what families do for each other. Madison was trapped by her own performance. She couldn't refuse without looking selfish and petty, especially after spending the morning playing the supportive sister role for her social media audience. But agreeing meant giving up the thing she'd chosen specifically to outshine me. Of course, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course I'll share my dress. That's what sisters do. You're amazing, I said, hugging her tightly. This means everything to me. You're literally saving my wedding day. Over her shoulder, I caught Jessica's eye. My maid of honor looked puzzled but intrigued, clearly sensing that something was happening beneath the surface. As Madison reluctantly left to retrieve her dress, Jessica pulled me aside. What's really going on here? She whispered. You've been weird all morning, and now you're suddenly okay with wearing the dress of the person who destroyed yours? Sometimes, I said quietly. The best revenge is letting someone give you exactly what you need to destroy them. Jessica stared at me for a moment, then grinned. I don't know what you're planning, but I'm here for it. 20 minutes later, Madison returned with her dress, holding it like she was carrying her own funeral shroud. The beautiful creation that had been her pride and joy now represented her complete defeat, and she knew it. Here, she said, laying it carefully on the bed. Try it on. I held up the dress, admiring the intricate beadwork and flowing lines. It really was stunning, exactly the kind of dress that would photograph beautifully and make everyone remember the bride who wore it. It's perfect, I said, and for the first time all day I was telling the complete truth. Because in 3 hours I was going to walk down the aisle in Madison's dream dress. while she sat in the audience wearing borrowed clothes, watching me claim not just her dress but her entire identity as the beautiful, enviable sister. And that was just the beginning of what I had planned for her. The transformation was stunning, even I had to admit. Madison's designer dress fit me better than either of us had expected, the silk settling against my curves like it had been tailored specifically for my body. The hand-beaded bodice caught the light perfectly, and the cathedral train created an ethereal silhouette that made me look like I'd stepped out of a fairy tale. But the real magic wasn't in how I looked. It was in Madison's face as she watched me become everything she'd planned to be. "You look," she started, then stopped, her voice catching. "Beautiful," Mom finished, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sophia, you look absolutely radiant." Quote. Jessica was recording everything on her phone, capturing Madison's expression as I turned in front of the mirror. The footage would be invaluable later, but for now, I focused on playing the grateful sister. "Madison, I can't thank you enough," I said, reaching for her hands. "This dress is perfect. You've literally saved my wedding day." She managed a weak smile. "Of course, I'm so happy I could help." But her eyes told a different story. They were fixed on the dress with the intensity of someone watching their dreams walk away in silk and beadwork. She'd probably imagined this moment 1,000 times. Stepping into this creation, feeling the weight of the train, seeing herself transformed into the perfect bride. Instead, she was watching me live out her fantasy while she stood there in a terry cloth robe, about to be relegated to wearing whatever bridesmaid leftovers we could find. "Now we need to get you dressed too," I said brightly. "Jessica, didn't you bring that spare bridesmaid dress, the navy one?" "Right here," Jessica said, producing a simple A-line dress from the garment bag. It was pretty enough, but comparing it to the designer creation I was wearing was like comparing a Honda to a Ferrari. Madison's face went pale. That's what I'm wearing?" "It's beautiful," I insisted. "And the navy looks amazing with your coloring. You'll look lovely." "Lovely. Not stunning, not breathtaking, not unforgettable. Lovely. The kind of compliment you give someone when they've made an effort but fallen short of spectacular." Madison took the dress with shaking hands, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the smell of my burning dreams and the satisfied smile on her face as she watched my life go up in smoke. I need to call my hairstylist," she said suddenly. "This changes everything. My whole look was planned around my dress." "Oh, don't worry about that," I said, still playing the oblivious bride. "You always look gorgeous no matter what you wear. Natural beauty like yours doesn't need much help." It was a perfectly poisonous compliment. Natural beauty implied she didn't need professional styling, while simultaneously suggesting that what she was wearing now was somehow beneath that beauty. Madison caught the subtle dig, her eyes flashing with anger before she forced another smile. "Right, natural beauty, of course." Quote. As the bridesmaids helped Madison get ready, I excused myself to make a phone call. Ray answered on the first ring. "How did the fitting go?" he asked. "Perfect. She gave me the dress herself, in front of witnesses. And Jessica got it all on video." "Beautiful. That's going to be crucial for what comes next." "Are you ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 was the part I'd been both dreading and anticipating. It was one thing to outwit Madison in private, but what I was about to do would be public, permanent, and impossible to take back. "I'm ready," I said. "Is everything in place?" "Your photographer knows what to look for. The videographer has been briefed. And I've got 3 officers positioned at the reception venue, just in case things get emotional." "They will," I said with certainty. Madison doesn't handle losing gracefully. An hour later, we were all loaded into the wedding party transportation, a vintage trolley that would take us from the hotel to St. Catherine's Church. I sat in the front, Madison's dress spreading around me like a pool of liquid light, while Madison herself hunched in the back wearing the navy bridesmaid dress and a forced smile. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. Every photo taken today would show me radiant and regal, while Madison faded into the background like any other member of the wedding party. The woman who'd spent her entire life being the center of attention was about to experience what it felt like to be invisible. Sophia, you need to see this, Jessica whispered, sliding into the seat next to me. She showed me her phone, where Madison's Instagram story was playing. Madison had posted a series of videos from the morning, but the narrative had shifted dramatically. What started as supporting my sister through a wedding disaster had become, my sister is wearing my dress. The comments were interesting. Wait, that's your dress she's wearing? Why didn't you keep it for your own wedding? That dress is gorgeous. When are you getting engaged? Awkward wearing your sister's wedding dress to her wedding? Madison was getting exactly the kind of attention she hated. The kind that made her look foolish instead of enviable. And the best part was, she'd created the situation herself. She's deleting comments, Jessica observed. Look, she's trying to control the narrative, but people are asking too many questions. Quote, I watched Madison frantically typing responses, trying to spin the story back in her favor, but the damage was done. She'd positioned herself as the generous sister, but now she looked like someone who'd given away her most prized possession, and was having second thoughts. Let her dig herself deeper, I said quietly. The hole she's creating is exactly where I need her to be. When we arrived at the church, the photographers were waiting. They'd been briefed by Ray to capture every moment, every expression, every interaction between Madison and me. What they saw was a bride who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, and a sister who looked like she was attending someone else's wedding. Father Murphy greeted us at the entrance, his face lighting up when he saw me. Sophia, my dear, you look absolutely magnificent. That dress is extraordinary. Thank you, Father. It's my sister's dress, actually. She was kind enough to lend it to me after the incident yesterday. Father Murphy's expression shifted to concern. Incident? I heard there was some kind of accident with your original dress. Not an accident, I said quietly, loud enough for Madison to hear but soft enough to seem confidential. Someone burned it, deliberately. The priest's eyes widened. Burned it? Who would do such a thing? I didn't answer directly, but my meaningful glance toward Madison was captured by 3 different cameras. Let the footage speak for itself. As we prepared for the ceremony, I caught sight of Daniel waiting at the altar. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, but more importantly, he looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to protect what we had. Madison positioned herself behind me as we lined up for the processional, and I could feel her simmering resentment like heat from a fire. She was trapped in a role she'd never wanted to play, supporting a sister she'd tried to destroy, wearing a dress that screamed, secondary character, while I claimed the starring role in her designer creation. You know, she whispered, leaning close enough that her voice wouldn't carry, that dress was meant for someone special, someone who deserved it. You're right, I whispered back, and now it's exactly where it belongs. The music began, and one by one, the bridesmaids walked down the aisle. Madison went third, her face carefully composed, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I watched her walk toward Daniel, probably imagining it was her own wedding, her own moment of triumph. But when the wedding march began and I stepped into view, every head in the church turned toward me. The collective gasp was audible, and I saw Daniel's face light up with such pure joy that it almost made me forget about revenge entirely. Almost. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Father Murphy spoke about love and commitment, about choosing to build something together that was stronger than either person could create alone. Daniel and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promises about supporting each other's dreams and protecting what we'd built together. But underneath the sacred words and solemn promises, I was acutely aware of Madison sitting in the front row, watching me live out what should have been her fantasy. Every photo being taken, every moment being filmed, every memory being created would forever show me in her dress, claiming her spotlight, becoming the bride she'd always planned to be. When Daniel kissed me at the altar, sealing our marriage with the kind of passionate joy that made the congregation cheer, I caught Madison's reflection in the church windows. She wasn't clapping, she wasn't smiling, she was staring at us with the kind of naked envy that would have scared me once. Now it just made me smile. The receiving line after the ceremony was my first real test. Guest after guest complimented my dress, and I made sure to credit Madison every single time. "Thank you so much. It's actually my sister's dress. She was generous enough to lend it to me after my original dress was destroyed." Destroyed? How terrible. But how wonderful that your sister could help. Yes, Madison's always been so supportive, even after everything that happened yesterday. Each exchange planted seeds of curiosity and suspicion. Why had my dress been destroyed? What happened yesterday? Why did I look so radiant, while Madison looked increasingly uncomfortable? Daniel's Aunt Eleanor, a sharp-eyed woman who'd never liked family drama, pulled me aside as we were leaving for photos. "Dear, I couldn't help but notice some tension. Is everything all right with your sister?" "Everything's perfect," I said with a bright smile. Madison's been incredibly helpful throughout this whole process. Even after well, it's not important now. What matters is that she saved the day. After she what? Eleanor pressed. Oh, I probably shouldn't say anything. Family business, you know. But let's just say Madison has very strong opinions about wedding dresses. Eleanor's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. I see. Well, she certainly helped in the end. The photo session was where Madison's composure finally began to crack. The photographer, following Ray's instructions, captured everything with journalistic precision. The family photos, the sister shots, the bridal party portraits, all of them would forever document this day when Madison gave away her power and watched me claim it. "Can we get some shots of just the bride and her sister?" the photographer asked. "I love the story of the borrowed dress. It's so touching." Madison and I posed together, her arm around my waist, both of us smiling for the camera. But in the photos, the difference between us was stark. I glowed with happiness and confidence, while Madison looked like she was attending a funeral. "These are beautiful," the photographer said, reviewing the shots on his camera. "You can really see the love between you two. Madison, you must be so proud of your sister." "So proud," Madison managed, her voice strained. "And so generous," I added. Madison literally gave me the dress off her back to make sure my day was perfect. It was technically true, but the way I said it made it sound like Madison had made some noble sacrifice rather than been maneuvered into a corner. The photographer ate it up, already envisioning the beautiful story he'd tell in the wedding album. As we prepared to leave for the reception, Madison finally cornered me in the bridal room. "What are you doing?" she hissed, dropping her sweet sister act now that we were alone. "I'm getting married," I said innocently, wearing the most beautiful dress I've ever seen, thanks to my generous sister. You know what I mean. This performance. The comments to the guests, the photo sessions, the way you're acting like some kind of martyr. I'm not acting like anything. I'm just telling people the truth. You did give me your dress. You have been helpful. You were involved in what happened to my original dress. Her face went white. You can't prove anything. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video she'd recorded herself. Actually, I can. Amazing what people upload to cloud storage without thinking about it. Madison stared at the screen, watching herself burn my dress while laughing. How did you get this? Family sharing plan. You gave me access to your cloud account years ago, remember? For sharing photos. The realization hit her like a physical blow. You've been watching me, planning this. I've been protecting myself, I corrected, and now I'm claiming what's mine. This dress is mine. Was yours, I said calmly. You gave it to me, remember, in front of witnesses. It's my wedding dress now. Madison's hands shook with rage. You can't do this. You can't just take my life. I'm not taking your life, I said, smoothing the silk skirt that had once been her pride and joy. I'm living mine, finally. As I walked out of the bridal room, leaving Madison trembling with fury behind me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just happiness, not just satisfaction, but power. The kind of power that comes from refusing to be a victim, from taking control of your own story, from making the people who tried to destroy you watch as you rise from the ashes they created. The reception was about to begin, and Madison had no idea what I had planned for the main event. But she was about to find out. The Riverside Manor ballroom had been transformed into something magical, Fairy lights draped from the ceiling, white roses cascaded from towering centerpieces, and the dance floor gleamed under crystal chandeliers. It was everything I'd dreamed of for my reception, but now it served a dual purpose: celebration of my marriage and theater for Madison's complete undoing. As Daniel and I made our grand entrance as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. I could see phones recording from every angle, capturing me in Madison's designer dress as I claimed the spotlight she'd always considered her birthright. The irony was delicious. She destroyed my dress to prevent this exact moment, only to provide me with something even more spectacular. Madison followed behind with the rest of the wedding party, her face a carefully controlled mask that couldn't quite hide the rage simmering underneath. She'd managed to touch up her makeup, but no amount of concealer could cover the defeat in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Torres." Daniel spun me around the dance floor for our first dance, and I felt like I was floating, not just from happiness, but from the intoxicating rush of finally being in control. For once in my life, I wasn't reacting to Madison's schemes. I was 3 steps ahead of them. "You look incredible," Daniel whispered in my ear as we swayed to our song. "But there's something different about you today. Something fierce." "I'm done being afraid," I whispered back. "Done letting other people write my story." He pulled back to look at me, concern flickering in his eyes. "Is this about Madison? Sophia, I know she burned your dress. I found the video on your phone when you left it charging in our room." My heart skipped. "You saw it?" "I saw enough, and I saw how you handled it. I'm proud of you for being the bigger person, for letting her help instead of calling her out publicly." Daniel thought I was being gracious. He had no idea I was being strategic. "The night is young," I said mysteriously. "Save your pride for later." As our first dance ended, the traditional reception events began flowing like a carefully choreographed performance. The father-daughter dance, the bouquet toss, the cake cutting. Each moment another opportunity for Madison to watch me live out the fairy tale she'd tried to destroy. But it was during the toast portion that I began phase 2 of my plan. Daniel's best man, Marcus, went first with a funny story about how Daniel had practiced his proposal speech on him for weeks. My maid of honor, Jessica, followed with a touching tribute to our friendship. Then came the family toasts. Dad stood up with his champagne glass, beaming with pride. To my daughter, Sophia, who has always been the kind of person who finds a way to make beautiful things happen, even when life throws curveballs at her. The guests laughed and clapped, thinking he was making a general comment about resilience. But I caught the meaningful look he gave me, and I realized he knew more about yesterday's curveball than he'd let on. Mom was next, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Sophia has always been our quiet achiever, the one who works behind the scenes to make everyone else shine. Today, seeing her in that gorgeous dress, looking so radiant, reminds us that sometimes the quiet ones have the most beautiful surprises. More applause, more knowing glances. I was beginning to suspect that Madison's deception hadn't been as successful as she'd thought. Then Madison stood up. She'd clearly spent the cocktail hour preparing her toast, probably crafting the perfect words to maintain her narrative of being the supportive sister. But I could see the calculations behind her eyes, the way she was measuring each word for maximum impact. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Sophia and Daniel," she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used for performances. "As Sophia's big sister, I've watched her grow into the amazing woman she is today. She's someone who doesn't give up, even when things don't go as planned." She paused, letting her eyes find mine across the room. "Yesterday was challenging, but Sophia handled it with such grace, and I was honored to help her find a solution. Sometimes the best moments come from the worst situations." The applause was polite but muted. Something about Madison's tone felt off, and I could see guests exchanging glances. She was trying too hard to sound magnanimous, and it was coming across as forced. But I wasn't done with her yet. "Actually," I said, standing up with my own champagne glass, "I'd like to add something to Madison's toast." The room quieted, all attention focusing on me. Madison's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty creeping into her expression. "Madison mentioned that yesterday was challenging, and I think our guests deserve to know just how challenging it was." I paused, letting the tension build. "You see, my original wedding dress was destroyed yesterday. Burned, actually. Completely. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was the first many of them were hearing about the incident, and the shock was palpable. But what made it truly devastating wasn't just losing the dress I'd dreamed of wearing, it was discovering that someone had filmed the destruction. Someone had recorded themselves burning my wedding dress and seemed to enjoy it. The silence in the room was deafening. Madison had gone pale, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Fortunately, I continued, my voice steady and clear, Madison was there to save the day. She offered me her own dress, this beautiful creation you see me wearing tonight. She literally gave me the dress off her back to make sure my wedding day was perfect. I raised my glass toward Madison, who was now frozen like a deer in headlights. To Madison, who taught me that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the ashes of our worst moments. The applause was confused, scattered. People were trying to process what I'd just said, to understand the implications. Why had I mentioned the filming so specifically? Why had I emphasized Madison's sacrifice in a way that sounded more pointed than grateful? As I sat down, I noticed several guests pulling out their phones. Within minutes, whispered conversations were spreading across the ballroom like ripples in a pond. People were putting pieces together, asking questions, sharing theories. Detective Ray Kowalski, dressed in a sharp navy suit and blending perfectly with the other guests, caught my eye from across the room and nodded slightly. Phase 2 was complete. Now came the part that would either vindicate me completely or blow up in my face. During the dinner service, I excused myself to freshen up and met Ray in the hotel corridor. Perfect execution, he said quietly. The questioning started the moment you sat down. Your cousin Trevor is already asking your aunt if she knew about the filming. Daniel's mother is demanding details from your mother. And Madison. What about Madison? She's been in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Jessica went to check on her and said she could hear crying. Good. Let her feel what it was like to be the one falling apart while everyone watched. Are you ready for the finale? Ray asked. I took a deep breath. Let's do this. When I returned to the ballroom, the energy had shifted dramatically. The festive celebration atmosphere had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension and curiosity. Groups of guests were huddled in intense conversations, and I could feel eyes following me as I made my way back to the head table. Madison was back in her seat, her makeup repaired, but her composure hanging by a thread. She kept checking her phone obsessively, probably monitoring her social media for damage control. But she had no idea what was coming next. The DJ called for attention as the evening's entertainment began. We'd hired a surprise performer, a vocalist named Carmen Rodriguez, who specialized in torch songs and had a voice that could make angels weep. She was also Daniel's cousin, and someone I'd specifically chosen for her ability to command a room. Ladies and gentlemen, Carmen announced, the bride has requested a special song tonight. She says it tells the story of her journey to this moment. The opening notes of Rise from the Ashes began playing, a haunting melody that filled the ballroom with its beauty. But as Carmen began to sing, the lyrics told a very specific story. She thought she could burn away my dreams, light the match and watch me fall. But from the ashes of her schemes, I found the strength to stand up tall. Quote, Madison's face went ashen as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just entertainment. This was my declaration of war, set to music and performed in front of 200 witnesses. What was meant to break my spirit became the fire that made me strong. Now I wear the very thing she feared it would prove her right and me wrong. Phones were out everywhere now, recording Carmen's performance and my reaction to it. I sat regally at the head table, Madison's designer dress catching the light like armor, while the woman who'd tried to destroy me crumbled in her borrowed bridesmaid dress. The song reached its crescendo. From the ashes, from the pain, I rose up like a phoenix bright. What she burned, I'll build again, and claim my place in my own light. The applause was thunderous, but it felt different now, not just appreciation for a beautiful performance, but recognition of the story being told. People were looking between Madison and me, connecting the dots, understanding the narrative I'd been weaving all evening. As Carmen took her bow, she made one final announcement that sent Madison over the edge. That song was inspired by a true story, she said into the microphone. About someone who tried to destroy a bride's dreams the night before her wedding, but only succeeded in making her stronger. Sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people closest to us, but they also reveal who we really are. Madison shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled backward. "Stop," she said, her voice cracking. "Just stop this." The entire ballroom turned to look at her, 200 pairs of eyes witnessing her public breakdown. This was the moment I'd been orchestrating all day, Madison's complete loss of control in front of everyone who mattered. "Madison?" Mom stood up, concern etched across her face. "Honey, what's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Madison's voice rose to a near shriek. "She's been planning this all day. The dress, the toast, the song. It's all calculated to make me look like what?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. Madison stared at me, her chest heaving, mascara starting to run despite her waterproof formula. "Like I'm the villain in your perfect little story." "Are you?" The question came from Daniel's grandmother, Eleanor, whose sharp eyes had been watching the drama unfold with fascination. The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. Madison looked around the room, seeing suspicion and judgment in the faces that had always shown her nothing but admiration. For the first time in her life, she was facing the consequences of her actions with nowhere to hide. I need some air," she whispered, and fled toward the terrace doors. I counted to 10, then followed her outside. Madison was standing at the railing, her hands gripping the metal so tightly her knuckles were white. The October night was crisp, and she was shivering in her thin bridesmaid dress. "You destroyed me," she said without turning around, "in front of everyone. At your own wedding." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I just stopped protecting you from the truth." She whirled to face me, tears streaming down her cheeks. The truth is that you've always been jealous of me, always wanted what I had, and now you've finally found a way to take it." "What exactly did you have that I wanted, Madison? The ability to hurt people who loved me? The need to tear others down to build myself up? The emptiness that comes from never earning anything honestly?" "I had everything!" she screamed. "I was beautiful. I was popular. I was the one everyone looked at when we walked into a room. And you were just there, in the background, where you belonged. And that wasn't enough for you, was it?" I stepped closer, my voice deadly quiet. "You couldn't just be beautiful and popular. You had to make sure I was nothing. You had to destroy every good thing in my life to prove you were better." Madison's face crumpled. I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd fight back," I finished. "You thought I'd always be your victim, always available for you to diminish whenever you felt threatened. But you made one crucial mistake, Madison." "What?" "You left evidence. You filmed yourself burning my dress because you wanted to savor the moment, wanted to watch it again later. But that evidence is going to cost you everything." Madison's face went white. "What do you mean?" I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my lips because it contained no warmth whatsoever. "I mean that insurance fraud is a felony, destruction of property is a crime, and I have everything documented thanks to your own narcissism. You wouldn't. Try me." For the first time in our lives, Madison was looking at me with something approaching respect. Not love, not sisterly affection, but recognition that she was facing an opponent who was done playing by her rules. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I said. "I want you to stop playing victim when you're the perpetrator, and I want you to know that I'm done being afraid of you." I turned to go back inside, then paused. "Oh, and Madison, that dress you're looking at, it's mine now. Officially. You gave it to me, remember? In front of witnesses." As I walked back into the ballroom, leaving Madison shattered on the terrace, I felt something settle into place inside my chest. Not revenge, exactly, but justice. The scales had finally balanced. But the night wasn't over yet, and neither was my plan. When I returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What started as a celebration had become something else entirely. A courtroom where 200 guests served as jury, and Madison's guilt was written across every whispered conversation and sideways glance. Daniel was waiting for me at our table, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "Is she okay?" he asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly worried about Madison's well-being. "She's processing some difficult truths," I replied, settling back into my chair. The designer dress rustled around me like a victory banner, every movement a reminder of how completely the tables had turned. "Sophia?" Mom approached our table, her face etched with confusion and growing horror. "People are asking questions. About Madison, about what really happened yesterday. Mrs. Hartford is demanding to know if her granddaughter-in-law is safe in this family." The last part stung, but not because it was unfair, because it was exactly the right question to ask. "What do you want to know, Mom?" I asked quietly. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Did Madison really? Did she deliberately destroy your dress?" I could have lied, could have maintained the family facade, protected Madison one more time, kept the peace that had never actually existed. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. Mom's hand flew to her mouth as she watched her eldest daughter gleefully destroy her youngest daughter's dreams. The shock on her face was genuine. She truly hadn't known the extent of Madison's cruelty. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sophia, how long has she been?" 24 years, I said simply. This was just the first time she left evidence. Dad appeared beside Mom, his face grim. "I've been hearing things, disturbing things. Is it true? About the dress?" I showed him the video too, watching his expression transform from confusion to anger to something approaching shame. "This is what our family looks like when no one's watching, Dad. This is what I've been living with while you all praised Madison for being, quote, naturally competitive." "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "Sophia, why didn't you ever tell us?" I tried. Remember when Madison accidentally ruined my science fair project in 8th grade? When she forgot to give me the message about my scholarship interview? When she convinced Tommy Chen I was seeing someone else behind his back? I told you. You said it was sibling rivalry. The weight of years of dismissed complaints and excused cruelties settled over them like fog. They were seeing their family, seeing Madison with clear eyes for the first time, and the view was devastating. What do we do now?" Mom asked helplessly. Before I could answer, a commotion erupted near the terrace doors. Madison had returned, but she wasn't alone. She'd apparently spent her time outside making phone calls, because she was now flanked by two people I didn't recognize, a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit, and a younger man with a tablet. "That's attorney Barbara Kellman," Ray appeared at my elbow, speaking quietly. "Specializes in family law and crisis management. The guy with her is probably a private investigator or reputation management consultant." Madison had called in reinforcements, but she'd made a critical error in judgment. She'd escalated this from a family dispute to a legal battle in front of a room full of witnesses. "Excuse me," Attorney Kellman announced in a voice that cut through the reception chatter like a blade. "I need to speak with my client privately." "Your client?" I stood up, and I could feel every eye in the room turning toward our unfolding drama. "Madison, you hired a lawyer? At my wedding reception?" "I had to." Madison's voice was shaky but defiant. "You're threatening me. You're trying to destroy my reputation, my future, my entire life over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" The words came out louder than I intended, carrying across the now silent ballroom. "You call deliberately burning my wedding dress a misunderstanding?" "Ms. Chen Rodriguez," Attorney Kellman interjected, "I strongly advise you not to make any more public statements about alleged incidents. My client is prepared to pursue legal action for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress." The audacity was breathtaking. Madison had committed actual crimes, and now she was threatening to sue me for talking about them. But I wasn't the same person who'd stood in her burned dress's ashes yesterday. I was someone who'd learned to fight back, and I had weapons Madison didn't know about. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I think everyone here deserves to know exactly what kind of misunderstanding we're talking about." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the reception sound system. The same system that had been playing our wedding music, the same speakers that had carried Carmen's haunting performance, now filled the ballroom with the sound of Madison's laughter as she watched my dreams burn. The video played on the main screen, larger than life, crystal clear. Madison poured lighter fluid on my dress. Madison lighting the fire. Madison recorded herself as she destroyed something irreplaceable, her face glowing with satisfaction. The silence that followed was deafening. "Turn it off," Madison whispered, her face white as paper. "Please, just turn it off." But I wasn't done. Wait, there's more. The second video began playing, the one Ray's team had recorded that morning, showing Madison's designer dress being destroyed in exactly the same way, under exactly the same conditions. The comparison was devastating. The same methodical destruction, the same accelerant patterns, the same scientific precision. "This is what Madison's dress looked like when it met the same fate," I announced to the transfixed audience. Amazing how similar the burn patterns are when someone really knows what they're doing. Attorney Kelman was frantically whispering to Madison, probably advising her to leave immediately. But Madison seemed frozen, watching her own cruelty played back for 200 people to judge. Daniel's grandmother Eleanor stood up slowly, her voice carrying the authority of her 87 years. "Young lady," she said, addressing Madison directly, "I have seen a great deal in my lifetime. Wars, depressions, family feuds that destroyed generations. But I have never seen such calculated cruelty from one sister to another. Mrs. Hartford," Attorney Kelman tried to intervene, "my client doesn't need to respond to." "Your client," Eleanor cut her off with the kind of steel that comes from decades of running charity boards and society functions, "is a grown woman who filmed herself committing a felony, and now she's brought lawyers to her sister's wedding reception to threaten the victim of her crime." The murmur of agreement that rippled through the crowd was like a wave breaking. Madison's support, her lifelong position as the golden child, was crumbling in real time. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "if this young woman thinks she can intimidate my granddaughter-in-law with legal threats, she has severely underestimated the Hartford family's resources and our commitment to protecting our own." It was a declaration of war from one of Connecticut's most influential families, and everyone in the room understood the implications. Madison wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was taking on people with money, connections, and the power to destroy her social standing permanently. "This has gone too far," Dad said, stepping forward. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Madison, you need to leave, now." "Dad?" Madison's voice broke on the word. "You're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of the truth," he replied firmly. "And the truth is that what you did was unforgivable. You deliberately tried to destroy your sister's wedding day, and when that didn't work, you brought lawyers to her reception to threaten her." "But I'm your daughter too." "Yes, you are. And I failed you by not stopping this behavior years ago. I failed both of you." Dad's voice carried a weight of regret that seemed to age him before our eyes. "But I won't fail Sophia again." Madison looked around the room desperately, searching for a single friendly face, one person who might support her. But the video had shattered every illusion, exposed every carefully constructed lie. The woman who'd spent her life being admired and envied was now being seen for exactly what she was. "You planned this," she said, turning back to me with something approaching awe in her voice. "All of it. The dress, the song, the video, even having your husband's family here to witness it. You orchestrated my complete destruction." "No," I said calmly. "You orchestrated your own destruction the moment you lit that match. I just made sure there were consequences." "Consequences?" Attorney Kelman stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Ms. Torres, I assume you have legal representation? Because my client intends to pursue every available remedy for this public humiliation." That's when Ray stepped forward, badge visible on his belt. "Actually, counselor, your client should be more concerned about the criminal charges she's facing." The change in the room's energy was electric. A police officer at a wedding reception was unusual. A police officer who clearly knew the details of Madison's crimes was terrifying. "Detective Ray Kowalski, Connecticut State Police, Arson Investigation Unit," Ray introduced himself formally. "Ms. Madison Chen, you're under investigation for arson, destruction of property, and insurance fraud." Madison swayed on her feet like she might faint. "Insurance fraud?" "The dress your sister was supposed to wear was insured for its full replacement value," Ray explained, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. When you destroyed it, you created a fraudulent insurance claim. That's a federal crime. But I didn't file any insurance claim. Your sister did. This morning. With full documentation of the destruction, including your own video evidence of the arson. Ray's smile was cold and professional. Amazing how helpful criminals can be when they document their own crimes. I watched the blood drain from Madison's face as she realized the trap she'd walked into. By destroying my dress, she'd forced me to file an insurance claim. By filming herself committing the crime, she'd provided the evidence for her own prosecution. By hiring lawyers and threatening me publicly, she'd demonstrated consciousness of guilt and escalated a family dispute into a criminal matter. You can't do this, Attorney Kelman protested. This is clearly a family dispute being weaponized through the legal system. Ma'am, Ray replied politely, arson is arson. It doesn't matter if the perpetrator is related to the victim. Would you prefer your client answer questions here, in front of all these witnesses, or down at the station? The room was silent, except for the sound of phones recording every word. Madison's public humiliation was being documented by dozens of devices, uploaded to social media in real time, shared across networks where her reputation was being destroyed one view at a time. I want to make a statement, Madison said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Madison, no, her attorney warned sharply. Don't say anything. But Madison was beyond legal advice now. She was a woman watching her entire world collapse and desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage. I did it, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I burned Sophia's dress. I planned it, I filmed it, I enjoyed it. Tears were streaming down her face, but she continued. I've been jealous of her my entire life. She was smarter, kinder, more genuine than I ever was, and I couldn't stand it. The confession hung in the air like a sword. Attorney Kelman closed her eyes in defeat, knowing her client had just destroyed any possible legal defense. I told myself she deserved it, Madison continued, her voice breaking, that she was trying to steal my spotlight, my identity, my place in the family. But the truth is, I was afraid she was better than me. And instead of trying to be better myself, I tried to tear her down. She turned to face me directly, mascara streaking her cheeks, her designer dress wrinkled and stained from crying. I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry for the dress, for the wedding, for 24 years of making your life smaller so mine could feel bigger. I'm sorry for being the sister you deserved better than. The apology was everything I'd ever wanted to hear and completely meaningless at the same time. Words couldn't undo decades of cruelty, couldn't restore the trust that had been shattered, couldn't repair the damage she'd done to my ability to believe in family love. I accept your apology, I said quietly, but I don't forgive you, and I won't protect you from the consequences of your choices anymore. Madison nodded, seeming to understand that this was the end of our relationship as sisters. What happens now? Ray stepped forward, handcuffs visible on his belt. Now you come with me to answer some questions. And your attorney can explain how confession to felony charges in front of 200 witnesses affects your legal options. As Ray led Madison toward the exit, she paused one last time to look back at me. You got everything you wanted, she said, her voice empty of everything except exhaustion. I hope it was worth it. I didn't want to destroy you, Madison, I replied honestly. I just wanted you to stop trying to destroy me. The ballroom doors closed behind them, and for the first time in my life, I knew Madison couldn't hurt me anymore. She had no power over me, no ability to diminish my joy or steal my achievements or poison my relationships. I was finally completely free. Daniel wrapped his arms around me as the guests began to process what they'd just witnessed. Are you okay? He asked softly. I looked around the ballroom, at our friends and family, at the fairy lights and flowers, at the evidence of a celebration that had become something much more significant. This wasn't just our wedding anymore. It was the day I stopped being a victim and became the architect of my own justice. I'm perfect, I said, and for the first time in my life I meant it completely. 6 months later, I stood in the office of Hartford & Associates, Connecticut's most prestigious law firm, wearing a tailored black suit and the kind of confidence that comes from surviving your worst nightmare and emerging stronger. The insurance settlement check in my briefcase was for far more than my original dress had cost, thanks to the punitive damages awarded for the criminal destruction of property. But money wasn't why I was here. Eleanor Hartford sat across from me, her silver hair perfectly styled, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her one of Connecticut's most formidable philanthropists. "The foundation is ready to move forward," she said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk. "The Madison Chen Foundation for Survivor Advocacy has been fully funded and legally established." The irony of naming an organization dedicated to helping abuse survivors after my abuser wasn't lost on either of us. But sometimes the most powerful statements are written in the language of justice rather than revenge. "The initial endowment is substantial," Eleanor continued. "Between the Hartford family contribution, the insurance settlement, and the proceeds from Madison's asset liquidation, we have enough to operate for at least 10 years. Asset liquidation, such clinical terms for the complete dismantling of someone's life. Madison's designer wardrobe sold at auction, her luxury car repossessed. Her trust fund frozen pending the outcome of her criminal trial. Her social media accounts deleted after the harassment became unbearable. Her modeling contracts terminated when the brands couldn't distance themselves fast enough from her toxicity. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the shift in narrative that had rippled outward from that wedding reception video, like stones thrown into still water. The footage had gone viral within hours of being posted, not because people enjoyed watching a family destroy itself, but because it perfectly captured something millions of people had experienced but never seen validated. The golden child whose cruelty was always excused, the quiet sibling whose pain was always minimized, the family systems that protected abusers and silenced victims. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, who was now working as the foundation's communications director. "Another news station wants an interview." That makes 12 this week. Also, the documentary people called again. The documentary crew had been following my story since the trial, fascinated by what they called, quote, "the perfect crime of justice." They wanted to explore how someone could methodically dismantle their abuser using nothing but truth, patience, and the abuser's own weapons turned against them. But I wasn't ready to be a public symbol yet. I was still learning how to be a private person who wasn't afraid. Daniel found me in the law firm's lobby, scrolling through messages from strangers who'd reached out to share their own stories of sibling abuse, family scapegoating, and the particular hell of being gaslit by people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. "How did it go?" he asked, kissing my cheek and noticing the folder in my hands. "We're officially operational," I said, still somewhat amazed that 18 months ago I'd been the family victim, and now I was running an organization dedicated to helping other victims find their voices. "Eleanor thinks we can help at least 50 families in our first year." Daniel smiled, the same warm expression that had made me fall in love with him in that Northwestern library. "I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've built, but for who you've become." Who I'd become. It was still strange to think about. The quiet, accommodating girl who'd spent her life minimizing herself to avoid conflict had transformed into someone who could look powerful people in the eye and demand justice. Not because I'd become cruel or vindictive, but because I'd finally learned the difference between being kind and being disposable. We drove home to our house in West Hartford, a Victorian cottage that Eleanor had helped us find after it became clear that staying in Millbrook wasn't an option. The town had chosen sides after the trial, and while more people supported me than I'd expected, the daily reminders of my old life were too heavy to carry. The cottage was everything Madison's aesthetic had never been: warm instead of stark, comfortable instead of performative, filled with books and plants, and the kind of gentle chaos that comes from actually living in a space rather than curating it for photographs. Madison, meanwhile, was living in a one-bedroom apartment in Hartford, working as a night shift clerk at a convenience store while she waited for her sentencing hearing. The felony arson conviction had come with a suspended sentence thanks to her confession and cooperation, but the insurance fraud charges were federal, and those carried mandatory minimum prison time. Mom visited her twice a week, still trying to understand how she'd raised a daughter capable of such calculated cruelty. Dad had stopped visiting altogether after Madison blamed them for creating a monster during one particularly bitter conversation. They'd both asked to see me multiple times, desperate to rebuild some kind of family relationship, to find a way forward that didn't involve complete estrangement. But I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with good intentions and guilt. The therapy had helped with that decision. Dr. Patricia Williams specialized in family trauma and had spent months helping me understand that forgiveness wasn't a debt I owed anyone, that healing didn't require reconciliation, and that choosing myself over family harmony wasn't selfish. It was survival. You've spent your entire life being told that love means accepting unacceptable behavior, she'd said during one particularly breakthrough session. But real love, healthy love, includes boundaries, accountability, and the expectation of basic respect. It was revolutionary thinking for someone raised in a family where keeping peace meant accepting pieces of yourself being slowly stripped away. The Foundation's first major event was scheduled for the anniversary of my wedding, not because I wanted to commemorate the drama, but because the date had become symbolic of transformation. We were hosting a conference called Breaking the Silence When Family Becomes the Enemy, featuring speakers who'd survived various forms of familial abuse and experts in trauma recovery. The keynote speaker was Dr. Susan Martinez, a researcher who'd spent decades studying sibling abuse and its long-term psychological effects. Her work had been crucial in Madison's prosecution, helping establish that what I'd experienced wasn't normal sibling rivalry but systematic psychological torture. Most people don't understand that siblings can be abusers, Dr. Martinez had explained during Madison's trial. They assume family love creates automatic protection. But families can be the most dangerous places for children because the abuse is normalized, excused, and hidden behind the myth of unconditional love. The trial itself had been surreal. Madison's defense team tried to paint her as someone who'd made a mistake in a moment of jealousy, a good person who'd acted out of character under stress. But the evidence was overwhelming, not just the dress burning, but the pattern of behavior I'd documented over the years. Jessica's testimony about witnessing Madison's cruelty during college, former classmates describing incidents they'd dismissed as harmless competition, teachers who remembered strange dynamics between us, family friends who'd always wondered why I seemed so quiet around my vivacious sister. The prosecution built a case that showed Madison's crime wasn't an isolated incident, but the culmination of decades of psychological abuse. The dress burning was just the first time she'd been sloppy enough to leave evidence. Madison's confession at the wedding reception had been legally devastating but psychologically revealing. For the first time in her life, she'd told the complete truth about our relationship, admitting to patterns of behavior that explained decades of family dynamics. But confession without change is just performance, and Madison's subsequent behavior proved she was more sorry about being caught than about the damage she'd caused. During the trial, she tried to contact me repeatedly, sending letters that alternated between apologies and accusations. One day she'd write about how sorry she was and how much she wanted to make amends. The next day she'd blame me for destroying the family and being vindictive by pressing charges. The letters revealed someone who still couldn't take full responsibility for her choices, who still saw herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of consequences. I'd stopped reading them after the first month. The anniversary conference was a massive success, drawing attendees from across New England and generating media coverage that helped launch conversations about sibling abuse in mainstream outlets. But the moment that mattered most to me was much smaller and more personal. During the lunch break, a young woman approached me hesitantly. She was maybe 22, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from carrying secrets that feel too big to share. "Ms. Torres?" she said quietly. "I saw your story online, about your sister, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For showing me that I'm not crazy. That what my brother does to me isn't normal. That I don't have to accept it just because we're family." She told me about her older brother who'd spent years systematically destroying her confidence, her relationships, her sense of self-worth. About parents who called it sibling rivalry and told her she was too sensitive. About feeling trapped in a family that prioritized peace over protection. I've been documenting everything since I saw your story, she said, showing me her phone filled with screenshots, photos, and voice recordings. I'm building my case just like you did. Watching her walk away with her shoulders straighter and her head higher, I understood something fundamental about justice. It's not just about punishing the guilty, it's about empowering the innocent to refuse victimhood. The ripple effects of my story had reached further than I'd ever imagined. Law enforcement agencies were developing new protocols for investigating familial abuse. Therapists were recognizing patterns they'd previously dismissed. Families were having difficult conversations about dynamics they'd always accepted as normal. But the most important change was personal. I was no longer the girl who set herself on fire to keep others warm. I was the woman who'd learned to build her own light and let others find their way to it. That evening, Daniel and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset paint our new neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. A year and a half ago, I'd been planning a wedding while navigating Madison's sabotage. Now I was running a foundation, building a marriage based on mutual respect, rather than desperate gratitude, and discovering what life felt like when you weren't constantly braced for the next attack. Any regrets? Daniel asked, reading the contemplative mood that always came over me on difficult anniversaries. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the public humiliation of someone I'd once loved? Did I regret the family fractures that might never heal? Did I regret choosing justice over family unity? No, I said finally. I regret that it took me so long to fight back. I regret all the years I spent trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. But I don't regret refusing to be her victim anymore. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Foundation's website. Another survivor requesting help, another person who'd recognized their own story in mine and decided to stop accepting the unacceptable. I thought about Madison sometimes, wondered if prison would give her the kind of forced reflection that might lead to genuine change. But I'd learned not to invest emotional energy in outcomes I couldn't control. My responsibility was to my own healing and to helping others find theirs. The Foundation had received hundreds of stories from people who'd experienced various forms of familial abuse, siblings who destroyed each other's belongings, parents who played favorites to devastating effect, extended family members who used family loyalty as cover for cruelty. But the stories that mattered most were the ones that ended with transformation, the victims who became advocates, the families who chose accountability over denial, the people who broke generational cycles of abuse by refusing to accept them as normal. As darkness settled over our neighborhood, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace with my choices. Not happiness exactly. The loss of family, even toxic family, leaves scars that never fully heal. But peace. The deep contentment that comes from living authentically, rather than performing acceptance. I'd learned that some battles are worth fighting, even when the cost is everything you once thought you wanted. Some bridges are worth burning when the alternative is slowly drowning in someone else's poison. Most importantly, I'd learned that justice isn't always swift or satisfying, but it's always worth pursuing. Because every person who refuses to accept abuse makes it a little easier for the next person to recognize they deserve better. The girl who'd stood in the ashes of her wedding dress had become the woman who built something beautiful from the ruins. Not because I was extraordinary, but because I'd finally learned something Madison never could. The difference between taking power and earning it. And in the end, that made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.